Welcome to the Power Lunch. This is Rhett Power. I'm Rhett Power, your host. We are on LinkedIn Live today, as well as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all with the help of Social Live. And we do the program every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 12 noon on LinkedIn's on this new platform, which is really exciting. The point of the show, as you know, is we talk to today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, corporate leaders about their secrets to success and about their expertise, all because we want to get better, right? As business leaders and business owners, we're always trying to improve. So that's why I have the caliber guests that I have on, because I feel like we can learn from them. Today is no exception. And my promise to you is always to bring you the best. Today, I think I did that. I've got Baer. He is one of the world's most inspirational marketing and customer experience speakers. If you've never heard him talk, go out, get on YouTube after this show, and you'll be blown away. Absolutely amazing. He is a Hall of Fame speaker. So if you ever get a chance to see him, please do that. He's a New York Times bestselling author of 6 books. He's a founder of 5 multi-million-dollar companies, and his latest book is Talk Triggers. And Jay, thank you for being on the program.
Mr. Rhett, thanks so much for having me. Delighted to be here. I love the intro video that you play. I feel like it's a tour of Rhett's beard length. There's like a lot of different, there's a lot of different vibes there, man. I like it. Yeah, it's like a grab bag of facial hair. It's a great intro.
Well, I think I left out the real. I had it very Taliban looking at some point, which was a bet with my 13-year-old that I eventually lost because I couldn't take it anymore. But
what was the bet? Like how long you could go without cutting it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Love it. And so I lost about $80 in that bet, I think.
Yeah. Well, but you gained the respective millions, so it's a fair trade.
There you go. Fair enough. So, man, you've been out there for a long time. You're just you're remarkable what you're talking about, and we're going to get into that. But what is something I have to ask this question? What is something that we don't know about Baer?
Oh man, that we could do a whole show on that. I'm an onion. Ogres are onions. I'm a tequila collector. I'm a certified barbecue judge.
I like that.
I spent a lot of time on my boat here in Indiana. I started the radio station at my college, University of Arizona, and I also got my start in politics. I used to be a political campaign consultant and ran campaigns for Congress and governor and statewide initiatives, and actually worked on some presidential campaigns as well. And then had the good sense to get out of politics as a career choice and get into digital marketing. Wow.
You and I must be akin somehow, because I was in college radio. I was in politics. I was in marketing. So that's. How
do you feel about tequila, Rhett? That's the real question.
And tequila, actually, that's a whole other story, but we had a tequila company.
Wow. That's impressive. I always feel like I should do like a tequila podcast, right? Like some sort of business advice, and then we just try a tequila and do like a tequila ratings plus business advice show. I got to work on that.
Well, ours really sucked, to be frank with you. It was called Little Borrachito, which is, I think, derogatory in Spanish. But
yes, it's okay.
But anyway.
It's all marketing.
Well, I'm not going to bore people with my sordid history, but I guess the big question I have is, what makes customers talk?
Well, I'll tell you what doesn't make customers talk, and it's the thing that we tend to rely on. So for the last, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to say since probably mid-60s, I don't know, the last 40 years or so maybe, businesses have sort of gotten sucked into this idea of best practices, right? Like let's find whomever is really good in our category of business. So if you're a plumber, who's the best plumber in your location? Who's the biggest company? And you try to kind of deconstruct their success, right? Why are they good? Is their advertising good? Is their customer service good? Are their employees good? And then we try and do what they have done, right? We essentially mimic success and try to copy what appears to be working. I totally get the intellectual attraction of that approach, right? Like, hey, this is a path that has proven successful. I should walk down that same path. But the byproduct of that, Rhett, is that we believe, then we convince ourselves, frankly, we fool ourselves as business people into thinking that competency creates conversation. That if you run a competent business, that customers will notice that and will somehow talk about that. And I understand why people think that on paper, but the reality is it's not how human beings behave. Some of this is just physiology, see? So as people, we are wired in our DNA to notice things that are different, that are outside of our accepted pattern, and we tend to ignore things that are the same. Okay. Consequently, the best way to get customers talking is to give them something to talk about, to do something different than what they expect. And that's not necessarily running a quote unquote good business. Running a good business keeps customers, but it doesn't create conversations. Like I don't know everybody tuning in today. I'm sure I know some of you, but I know this for sure, Rhett. Nobody has ever said these words. Nobody ever says, Rhett, check this out. Let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had. Right? Nobody says that because it's a crap story. It's not a story worth telling. It's not a story worth listening to. So to create conversations, to get your customers telling your story, to essentially turn your customers into volunteer marketers, you've got to give them a story to tell. You have to make an operational decision to do something that they will actually notice.
Okay. What you had a lot of case studies in Talk Triggers that I found really interesting. Were there any in there that really surprised you or stood out to you that you?
I think, I mean, there's so many, and in fact, there's probably, I don't even know, 30 or 40 case studies in the book. Small businesses, large, B2B, B2C, US, international. It's a panoply of case studies, and we have a bunch more. In fact, Daniel Lemon, my co-author, and I are proud to announce the first ever Talk Trigger Awards, which will be taking place on October 2nd. It's the 1-year anniversary of the book launch, and we have 18 additional companies that were not in the book at all that we have identified that are doing great things with word of mouth, and we'll be handing out awards in 6 different categories in a live webinar on the 2nd. So we're super psyched about that. TalkTriggers.com to tune in for the live webinar unveiling of the trophies. I'll tell you the one that I really found interesting, not necessarily as a word of mouth generator, but from a results standpoint. Okay. And it's one that we talk about a lot. It's DoubleTree Hotels. So famously, you probably know, Rhett, many people know that DoubleTree Hotels gives guests a warm chocolate chip cookie when they check in. They actually have an oven in every hotel, and the cookies are made fresh on site, etc. Now, a lot of people have experienced that, and that really is their talk trigger. It is their operational differentiator that is designed to create conversations. They've been doing it for 30 years, which is extraordinary longevity. Wow. And today, and tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, they give out about 75,000 cookies a day worldwide. Wow. A lot of cookies, right? Like, that's a serious amount of cookies. Now, the question becomes, all right, if you've been to a DoubleTree, you've definitely had the cookie. You've experienced the cookie ceremony, and you know, it is something that they do that no other hotels do. The real question becomes, okay, well, that's neat, but does that actually have an impact on their business? So Daniel and I, my co-author, did a whole research project where we actually surveyed a ton of DoubleTree guests, and we found out that 34% of them have actually told a story specifically about that cookie. So if you do the math on all that, Rhett, what that means is that today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after, 22,500 stories a day are told about a chocolate chip cookie. Now, the companion question on that is always, well, when's the last time you saw a DoubleTree ad? And the answer is probably not very often, because the cookie is the ad, and the guests are the marketing department in large measure. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes in business ever from Robert Stevens, who's the co-founder of Geek Squad. And Robert once said that advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable. Advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable. Now, that's not 100% true, right? There's a time and a place for advertising, but it is largely true. And the companies that are best at differentiation, the businesses that are best at word of mouth, those that actually have a talk trigger like DoubleTree, typically, not always, but typically spend the least on advertising because their customers are doing the work, the job that advertising is typically hired to do.
I mean, what I got out of the book, which I hadn't really thought about it in this way. You hear that you have to have a social media strategy, and you got to have a marketing strategy. You got to have. No one ever talks about, and I never thought about it in this context, but you have to have a word of mouth strategy, right? And that's, I think we've forgotten.
And practically nobody does.
No,
there's actual math on that fewer. This is going to freak you out, Rhett. Fewer than 1% of businesses have a word of mouth strategy.
I mean, that does blow me away, because I read something on your that you wrote. What is it, like 50 or 70, 80% or something of that? Buying decisions are made by word of mouth.
50% of all buying decisions are influenced by word of mouth. Yeah. So half of every dollar spent, word of mouth is part of that decision process. But nobody has a strategy, which is crazy, because you've got a social strategy, you've got a PR strategy, crisis strategy, hiring strategy, sales strategy, whatever. You got a whole shelf full of strategies. But word of mouth, which debatably is the most important way to grow your business, people just assume that customers will talk about them. They're like, yeah, we got it. It's like, do you though? You got to give somebody an actual story to tell, because again, competency ain't it, right? Nobody ever says, hey, let me tell you about the good food at the restaurant. Right. Of course the food was good. That's why it's a restaurant. That's why they're still in business. We expect that to happen, right? If I go flick off this switch and the lights go dark in this office, right, I'm not going to tell somebody a story about that, because that's how electricity works. You've got to do something they don't expect, right? Because what they expect is not worthy of a story. If you don't have a story, you don't have word of mouth. You don't have a word of mouth, then it makes it a lot harder to grow your business, because you got to pay to do it.
What is you talk about in the book about the is it the 4-5-6 strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is?
Yeah. So we structured the book.
Easy to implement.
Yeah. It's super easy to. Well, I shouldn't say easy. It is. It takes real work to have an actual word of mouth strategy, right? Because doing something that customers notice, you can't just snap your fingers and do it. You can't just sit in a conference room and brainstorm it, and then you got to stick with it, right? DoubleTree's been doing this for 30 years with the cookies, right? So it's not a piece of cake. I'm not going to suggest that it is, but we wrote the book so that people could really take a swing at this. Because here's the problem. There's a bunch of good books on word of mouth, tons. And many of the authors of those books are interviewed in my book. But here's my challenge with the word of mouth sort of book industry. There's lots of books out there, Rhett, that say word of mouth is really important. You should go get some. End of book. And it's like, right. Okay. I concur. Oh, thank you. So what Daniel and I wanted to do is make sure that we gave people a process for how to actually create a word of mouth strategy, how to implement it, how to test it, how to measure it. So consequently, the book is structured in a 4-5-6 system, easy to remember. It's the 4 R's, which are the 4 requirements of a talk trigger, the 4 things that must be true for your differentiator to work as a day-to-day conversation generator. So the 4 R's. Then you have the 5 types of talk triggers, 5 different ways that you can do this. So talk about generosity, for example, when you give customers something they don't expect, that's what DoubleTree does, right? It's a cookie. You don't expect a cookie. Talk about generosity. So there's 5 different types, and then a 6-step process for creating and implementing your own talk trigger. And that process is the same process that we use in my company, Convince and Convert, to help brands come up with their talk triggers all the time. So 4, 5, 6, and it's been really effective. It's easy for book readers to understand kind of where we're coming from and put it into practice. And it's awesome. We have a Facebook group for people who have read the book. It's really, really fun. And it's awesome because people read the book, They come up with an idea, they put it into practice, they come to the Facebook group and say, hey, we did it. And it's just so cool to see that actually happening, and gives me more case studies for speeches too.
Can you give me an example of a company that you can talk about that has put this system in place and it's really, and how it works?
Yeah. So we actually did a Talk Triggers training course in the spring. And one of our students in the course, he and his brother own a tuxedo shop in the Northeast.
Okay.
And it's they kind of specialize in not entirely, but they do a lot of proms, but they really do mostly weddings, right? So groom comes in, gets his tux, groomsmen come in, also get the tux, etc. Well, look, there's a lot of places you can get a tux in most metro areas, and unless you're really super fancy pants, like a tux is a tux is a tux at some level, right? It's like, yeah, it's all right, it's black and it's got a bow tie and it's got a cummerbund, and all right, how much is it? Like it's kind of commoditized, I think, in the minds of many grooms.
Kind of a dull business.
Yeah, it is. So they wanted to make sure that they created conversation, because their observation is really smart, is that people get into a time of their life where all their friends are getting married. You may remember that. Like, this is a long time ago for you and I, but there was a point where I was going to 6, 8, 10 weddings a year. Right. And now I go to, a wedding every 3 years, right? It's just a different, now it's divorce parties, right? Different story. So you're in that life stage and all your friends are getting married, right? And a lot of times in the same location. You're like, well, who did you use for flowers? Who did you use for tuxedo? Whatever. So the idea was, how do we create conversations? So we went through the whole process with these guys, and what they built in their tux shop is a smash room, a rage room. So you go in there, and the groom and the groomsmen can go in there, and they put on the pads, and they got baseball bats and golf clubs and big sticks, and then they've got glass ashtrays and light bulbs and dolls, and you just go in there and just go nuts, just break stuff to your heart's content, and you blow off some steam, and you're nervous because of the wedding, and it's been super effective. It's been a really, really good one for them.
That was unexpected. That's
it, right? Now, would you tell a story about that, right? If you're a groomsman, right? So you don't even pick the place, right? The groom tells you where to go, right. And you get in there, and we are getting fitted for your tux. You and your buddies all go in there and smash some stuff. Would you tell somebody that story? You absolutely would tell somebody that story, and then that person is like, oh, well, when I need a tux, I'm thinking of that place first. Step and repeat, step and repeat, step and repeat, step and repeat.
And they've done something that is absolutely remarkable, right? That's like nobody else would have thought of doing. I mean, that's it.
And they just went through the process, right? And the key to the process is to not do what you want to do, which is to sit in a conference room and brainstorm this. Because look, man, if it was that easy, you'd already have one. You really have to do the research. You have to talk to customers. We have a big interview process we require people to go through to actually have real conversations with customers about their expectations. The key is to understand what customers expect and anticipate, because the talk trigger, by definition, has to be something that they don't expect and anticipate, right? The element of surprise, right? Again, it's outside their pattern. That is what makes it talkable, right? It's not necessarily the thing. It's that the thing is different than they expected.
Do you think that with the way the world's going, Amazon, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I was going to buy shoes online or pants online, I'd have told you were crazy, right? Because, that's something that you want.
Number one seller of diamonds in America is BlueNile.com.
Right. So, I mean, it seems to me that businesses are going to have to do this to survive. I mean, particularly
something like this. Yeah, something like this, because everything else is going to be taken away. I'm working on a presentation, a new speech actually, and one of the stats is that something like 80, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's 84% of major company CMOs, right? This is big business. 84% of major company CMOs believe that by 2022 they will be competing primarily on customer experience. because price and features will be taken away as a differentiator, right? Whatever your price is, somebody else can match it or do it less. Whatever your options are, we make it in yellow, somebody else can match that or do it more. Like it's not a sustainable advantage. Price, supply chain, options, your core product is not a sustainable advantage. Your customer experience is a sustainable advantage. So you've got to get onto that train pretty quickly. And it doesn't have to be hard, right? You might think, well, geez, we can't put in a rage room in our office. I get it. Like that's that requires some stuff. But like, I'll give you another example. There's an accounting firm in Indianapolis, not too far from where I am, called Bogdanoff and Dodges. It's like a 2-man accounting firm. They have one associate and a receptionist, right? So they got 4 people in a small office. They do personal returns, small business returns. They have a talk trigger. Their talk trigger is that they return calls and emails from clients within 5 minutes, period.
Wow.
So if Paul is on the phone, Tim handles it. If Paul and Tim are on the phone, the associate handles it. If all 3 of them are on the phone, the receptionist handles it and says, hey, everybody's busy, but they'll be back to you when they can. But you get a reply within 5 minutes, phone or email, always. Now, look, I have had probably 11 accountants in my career, something like that. And all pretty good as far as I know. But I'll tell you a story I've never told, Rhett. I've never said, hey, let me tell you about my accountant. I looked at my returns and all the numbers added up.
Yeah.
Because we expect that to happen, right? That's what accountants do. There's no story there. But if I had an accountant that returned my phone call and my email within 5 minutes every time, would I tell that story to somebody?
You bet.
Hell yes.
Because you want
absolutely.
Because you want an answer. When you ask your accountant something, you're actually wanting an answer pretty quick. I mean,
it's not like, hey, sometime in the next 6 months, let me know if I have to pay a penalty. Usually you want to know, right? So that's an example of a customer experience differentiator. We call it a talk trigger that revolves around speed, and talkable speed is one of the 5 that you can employ. And that doesn't require any special equipment. That doesn't require, insurance to have your rage room. That requires you to want to do it. That just requires you to.
Yeah.
It's just process, right? It's just process and energy. Like literally everybody watching us could do that. Literally everybody. You just got to put in the time and the process. Period. Ta-da.
Are there any other talk triggers? I don't want to give away all the secrets in the book, but is there another one that we can think about?
Oh, so I was in Los Angeles last week, 2 weeks ago, and doing an event for Volkswagen Australia. They brought over a bunch of their dealers from Australia to LA to go to the Disney Institute and hear from me and some other speakers. And I met a guy, his name is James, and he runs the Volkswagen dealership outside of Brisbane in Australia. And we were talking about differentiators and word of mouth. And he said, I think we already have a talk trigger. I'm like, well, that's amazing because automobile dealers are usually not very good at this. And he's like, yeah, here's how it works. So they have on the roof of the dealership a series of beehives, flat roof. It's very tropical in Brisbane. It's green and good to do that, pollination and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a botanist or a biologist, but bees are good is my conclusion. But because they have the bees right there at the dealership, when you bring your vehicle in for service, you maybe have a collision or tire rotation or oil change or whatever you're doing. When you pick your car up, in the cup holder, they have a jar of honey with a little tag on it that describes the beehives are right here, right in the roof above where your car is right now. We're really committed to those kind of things here at the dealership, and thanks so much for bringing it in. Enjoy the honey. I'm like, that's amazing. Super great.
Right. And it takes that annoyance away from going to the dealership, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to do that. I actually have there's some great dealership examples out there on the collision side. There's a company in New York City that reconfigured the entire concept of car service. So what they do, it's called Paragon. They pick up your car at your house at night, and then they fix it overnight. So they work nights. They fix it overnight like magical elves, and they bring it back to you in the morning before you leave for work.
No way.
That's a story you would tell.
Yeah, in a big way.
It's a good one. That's a good one. So that's what's so fun about word of mouth is A, it is the most important thing in business that we don't talk about. And B, anybody can do it. Literally anybody. And C, there's always like this new flood of examples that I get exposed to that makes it really entertaining for me, because every time I give a speech or every time I write a follow-up blog post or a new book or whatever, the awards, we've got more and more material. Some people who have read the book are doing it, and other ones we just discover. It's a blast.
You talk about the shift that we've experienced sort of from companies to being in charge to customers being in charge of I guess, the experience or the feedback that people are.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that mean?
Mark Schaefer says this best in his new book, Marketing Rebellion, where he describes the fact that today most consumers can't really be marketed to, because anything you might use to reach them, they can disintermediate. So they don't read newspapers, they don't listen to the radio, they listen to Spotify, where there's not any ads in many cases. They've got ad blockers on their browser. They've got all kinds of spam filters on their email. They direct mail goes into the trash. Like, it's a lot of people are truly unreachable with conventional customer acquisition mechanisms.
Okay.
But what works is they ask their friends for recommendations, or their friends tell them a story about the honey they got when they picked up their car, or they look at ratings and reviews, right? That before they buy something, they're going to Yelp or TripAdvisor or G2 or whatever the ratings and review, apartments.com, whatever the ratings and reviews are, Google, obviously, in that category. And all that is, like, all a Yelp review is online word of mouth. It's the same exact mechanism, same thing. Right. So customers now are essentially the ones in charge of who gets paid and who doesn't get paid. And the more we can understand that and embrace that and activate customer conversations, the better off we'll be.
Does that mean asking for a Yelp review before you leave a restaurant? Or what is the practical application of that for a
Yeah, let me say that in two ways. Technically, Yelp's terms and conditions prohibit review solicitation. Actually, John Carroll, who is the head of business marketing for Yelp, was just on my podcast last Friday. My show is called Social Pros. It's all about social media, and he was on the show last Friday and talked a lot about this exact topic. So their terms and conditions say that you shouldn't or can't solicit a review. As a practical matter, of course, many people do. And I think you should always connect those dots for customers. Now, you never want to incentivize customers for review. You never want to say, hey, if you give us a review, we'll give you $5 off or whatever, for a couple of reasons. One, that is definitely a violation of terms of service. And two, fascinating research, Rhett. This came out last February, I think. Big academic study, university research found that when you essentially pay for reviews in some way, some sort of quid pro quo, the likelihood that a customer will leave a review goes down, not up. Because at that point, it's not about them letting the rest of the community know that you're really good. It feels like a transaction. It feels a little yucky. It feels like they're being bought. And they're like, hey, $5 isn't enough to do this. And so it actually suppresses instead of gooses review generation. So trying to tie it to something doesn't really work. But like, I just, right before we logged on, I got an email from a company in Toronto. Last week I was in Toronto and did an event, and we went to axe throwing. So all the speakers at the event went axe throwing, which I highly recommend, super fun. And they took a picture of our group afterwards, holding our axes. And then they just sent me an email, hey, your photo's ready. In the email, it's like, here's a link to your photo. By the way, click here to review us on Google, click here to review us on TripAdvisor, click here to review us on Yelp. I think that makes perfect sense, right? You know, it's not click here and we'll give you a sharper axe next time. Right. It's just, hey, by the way, we would like you to do this. And instead of you trying to hunt around to find our location, here's the direct link.
Right. It's a little nudge. It's not a...
Yeah, just a nudge, not a tackle.
And if you had a great experience, you're going to do it, right?
Absolutely.
Then
absolutely. And even if you didn't, and even if you had a bad experience, and that's my previous book, Hug Your Haters, is all about this, right? The fact that your unhappy customers are your most important customers, right? We always say, hey, we need as many 5-star reviews. No, you need as many reviews, because the people who hate you, who give you a 1-star review, are actually more important than the people who loved you. Because the people who didn't like you, generally speaking, are going to give you some sort of insights and information that you can use to make your business better. And that's gold.
I was always a proponent. And even in today, I'm still a proponent. When I had the toy company, I was always actually, I liked those negative reviews and I always engaged with them. And everybody in the department was like, "Oh no, don't do that. Don't engage with." But I think you have to.
I completely agree. Every time, our philosophy is you answer every review every time, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars, that you always reply. Because if you don't, right, no reply is a reply, isn't it? No reply is a reply that says we care so little about your experience, good or bad, that we refuse to even acknowledge it. And that doesn't speak very well for your business, I don't believe.
No, I always thought people were watching that too, right?
Of course they are.
I mean, it seemed to me that was like.
Of course they are, especially now, right? Especially now. Customer service is a spectator sport. It's not about you and that customer. It's about you, that customer, and all the other people who are looking on, which could be 10, could be 100, could be 1,000, could be 10,000, depending on your business and the venue. There's a lot more money at stake than whether this one guy, liked his toy, right? There's a lot of other folks out there who are making decisions based on how you handle that interaction, and remaining silent is not the best approach in my estimation.
Well, I always felt like I could solve the problem too, right? By a conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Even if you can't, even if you just say, "Hey, we're sorry and we screwed this up," even if you can't fix it, right? At least you're on record as paying attention.
Right. Well, I always like if that's definitely our fault, we can fix that.
That's right.
I mean, and when you admit that, I mean, it to me, it made us more real. It made us more.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, I get it. It's hard, especially for small businesses. When you encounter negativity, and everybody does at some point.
Sure.
Whether it's Yelp or Facebook or Google or email or phone call or hostage note, like whatever. It's hard for small business because it feels like somebody is telling you that your baby's ugly. And nobody likes to hear that, even if you know for a fact that your baby is ugly, right? Like nobody wants to hear that, right? And it's difficult. It hurts in your heart, and that's why you see all the time, right? You see these examples of companies, getting a negative Yelp review or whatever, and then getting into this like crazy, unhinged argument with the customer, and I just don't feel like that's a very productive approach.
No, it's not. What do you think we're doing social media all wrong now as companies?
I mean, it's becoming more about media and less about social. That's for sure. I mean, there's a couple things. One, most business social media is about the business, and that's a problem, right? It doesn't come from a perspective of how do we delight or inform or educate the audience. It's how do we tell the audience about us, which makes sense. Like I mentioned, like so many of the other customer acquisition vehicles, TV, radio, print, outdoor, direct mail, have become so expensive or so unsuccessful that now we think, oh, maybe we can use social media as the way we get customers. And social media was never designed as a customer acquisition vehicle for most businesses, right? DTC kind of things are working pretty well, but for most businesses, it's a little tricky. And so I feel like we're turning it into a customer acquisition channel in a way that customers don't really want. So there's that problem. And then obviously, we're in an era where organic social and social reach is diminished for most businesses. And so just by power of the algorithm, Twitter and Facebook and others, LinkedIn eventually, are saying, well, you're going to have to pay us if you want to reach your audience. And so the whole thing is a little bit of a mess right now. There's certainly lots of examples of companies doing great things with social media. We talk about it every week on my podcast, but there's also a lot of examples of companies who are not doing great things and are kind of banging their head against the wall.
What's something that if I'm a small business, how can I stop using it as about telling about me? And I mean, is it about telling about a customer experience or getting? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would think about, depending on your business, obviously, is just make it about the customers, right? So, number one, pick one or two channels, right? Don't try and be on every social channel because you're not going to be able to do them all well. So why bother? Pick a couple that you like, and then what if you just said, all right, twice a week we're going to interview a customer? Like, okay, here's Rhett, here's his deal. He's a customer. We love having him as a customer. Like, put the spotlight on other people. Like I said this in my very first book, The Now Revolution, which is now going back 7 or 8 years. The more you shine the spotlight on other people, the more that spotlight will eventually shine back on you. You just have to give it time and trust the process, and the process will work if you let it.
Yeah, this seems to me that we always want this instant result on social, and it's the long game, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. I mean, the relationships that you develop with people in social media, unless you're like, buying an ad, which is click here to, purchase whatever. And there is certainly some of that happening, and some of it's quite successful. But generally speaking, for most businesses, the relationships that you create in social happen a little bit at a time, not all at once. And, it's not a replacement for television, right? That's not how it works. It's, if anything, more like email, right? Where you're taking somebody who likes you and making sure they continue to like you, and maybe you turn them into somebody who loves you over time, right? So that's what we always tell our clients, right? That organic social in particular is much more like email than it is like anything else.
Indeed. What do you mean when you were talking about this earlier? But I think it was the book before this last one. When you talk about embrace your haters or love your haters, what is that?
Yeah, it's that sort of fundamental premise, right? That the people who, well, let me break this down mathematically, okay? So for every 100 unhappy customers, only 5 will tell you. 5 out of 100. And that's across all the contact mechanisms, right? That's phone and email and face-to-face and social and Yelp and whatever. 5 out of 100, which means that every time somebody says, I've got a complaint, 49 other people mathematically had a complaint, but just didn't say anything about it, right? It's a real dilemma. And so what that means is that the people who are taking their time, and they are taking their time to tell you what you could do better, are actually doing us an enormous favor. So we want to make sure that we take great care. I'll give you an example. There's a business called Le Pain Quotidien, which is a chain of bakeries and cafes. Okay. They've got, 250 locations, something like that. They're based in Brussels, Belgium, but they've got some in the Northeast. There's some in New York City, Philadelphia, Boston. There's one in Indianapolis. There's some in Los Angeles. They're kind of sprinkled about randomly in mostly metro areas. And they're good, right? It's kind of Euro style bakery cafe. It's really good, actually. They run an excellent business. When their new VP of customer service was hired, her name's Erin Pepper, she said, well, guys, we're running a good business here, but we're not perfect. And the only way we're going to be able to take it to the next level is to really drill down on the things that we're not doing perfectly. And some of those things, we might not even know about. We might not even know about it. So she went through this whole process to get more customer feedback, more input, to pull feedback out of the audience, and that was really successful. But then they still had, on occasion, people slamming them, complaining, 1-star reviews, whatever. So here's what she did. Somebody leaves a 1-star review, right? Unless it's just like somebody is just, off their rocker. But if it's a genuinely, constructive yet 1-star review, she sends them a direct message and says, Rhett, thank you very much for your feedback. We're terribly sorry about the experience you had at the Le Pain Quotidien location in Philadelphia. But I've been thinking, and you are a very perceptive customer. Frankly, you notice things that other customers simply ignore. And that's the kind of insight that we could use more of here at Le Pain Quotidien. I'll tell you what, Rhett, would it be okay if I sent you a $50 gift card once a month? And what I'd like you to do is twice a month, go to Le Pain Quotidien. If you want to go to different locations, that's great. You want to go to the same location, that's fine as well. But each time you have breakfast or lunch on us, could you click this link and fill out this very detailed survey of your experiences? Because you're the kind of discerning and insightful customer we need here. Would you do that for me? And they have about 200 of those secret shoppers right now filling out surveys every day. And that is an amazing program that doesn't, it's $50 a month times 200 people in gift cards for what is an incredibly robust secret shopper program.
No, I mean, that makes Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, absolutely
right?
brilliant.
So you take the people who hate you and you bring them into the fold, man. It's so smart.
I mean, it seems like if you're giving that kind of, if you take the time to give that kind of review, you want them to be better, right?
Right. That you nailed it, right? They're taking their time. Look, what kills businesses are not the 1-star review guy. What kills businesses is the guy who had a 1-star experience and never told you about it and never walks in the door again.
I had this.
That's dangerous.
I had this experience. Yeah, I had this experience a couple of years ago in a place I really, really loved, and they just responded so poorly to. I mean, it's a place I went once a week, and they just responded so poorly that I didn't go back. But I wanted them to just acknowledge it.
Yeah, you're rooting for them. I'll tell you one of the most critically amazing things in the history of business, and it's been tested over and over and over and over, is the fact that customers who had a problem that you can successfully address buy more and are more loyal than customers who never had a problem at all.
Indeed. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Exceptionally powerful. I'll tell you a story about that. I was doing an event also in Toronto. This is like about, 2 years ago. And I was working for an appliances manufacturer up there. Big company meeting, everybody's there, we're talking about customer experience, customer service. After my presentation, guy comes up to me and says, Jay, I heard what you said about, unhappy customers so you can solve their problems, becoming more loyal. Totally works. In fact, the number one sales team we have at the company is based on that principle. I'm like, oh, well, tell me more about that. So somebody calls in and they have a complaint about their washing machine, their dishwasher, their refrigerator, what have you. If the company can solve it, right, they can send a repair person, they can send a part, they can diagnose it on the phone, whatever. They flag that person in the database, right, as problem solved. They take those people who are flagged, put them in a special list. They have an inbound sales team, or inside sales team, I should say, that then calls those customers about 3 weeks later and says, hey, just wanted to check up, make sure everything's still cool with the refrigerator that we got fixed. Hey, by the way, have you ever thought about getting one of our dishwashers or one of our washing machines? They actually do a cross-sell. Number one most profitable, number one most successful, number one highest conversion rate in the entire corporation because of that psychological advantage, right?
Yeah.
If something was wrong, it's like a military exercise, right? It's like being in the foxhole together. Like the refrigerator's broken, we're taking live fire, right? And then they fix the refrigerator and like, high five, we did it together, right? And it changes at the molecular level, right? How you think about that brand. Now, as somebody who used to be in politics, what I always wonder is what kind of problem can I create intentionally that I know I can solve to actually trigger that behavior change. But don't try that at home, guys.
No, but I think that's brilliant in a way because you're using the data that you have, right? And you're using it really, really well. It's smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right there. I mean, look, here's the thing. Somebody said to me, not once, this happens to me with some degree of regularity. People say, Jay, I love your presentation or I love the book, but everything that you're saying is essentially common sense. I'm like, thank you for pointing that out. Of course it is. It's just not actually put into practice. Like every business in the world knows that word of mouth is important. 1% have a strategy. Every business in the world knows that customer service is important. Very, very few actually respond to all their customers, right? So all the things that I ask you to do make sense when you think about it. It's just you're not actually doing them, which is sort of my role is to make that happen.
Make that happen, right? So last question, I know you're going to get going, but what's the best advice you ever got? From who?
Best advice I ever got sort of fits nicely into what I just said. When I was an intern, I worked for a public relations firm in Phoenix called Nelson Ralston Robb. I was 18, summer after my freshman year of college. Mm-hmm. And it's like my second day. And the owner of the firm calls me in, says, let me tell you something. If you're going to be in professional services, you're going to be in communications and stuff. It's like, I want to remind you, our job is to give businesses our best possible advice. Their job is to decide whether or not to take it.
Yep.
And I still sort of live by that today as an author, as a speaker, as a consultant.
Yeah.
Like I can write the book and I can deliver the speech and I can do the podcast and I can write the blog post and I can do the strategy for you. But ultimately, you've got to make it stick. And hopefully I can arm you with the tools necessary to do that. But at some point it's on you. And it's good advice, because I know a lot of people who are in professional services who don't understand that advice quite as much, and it eats them up, right? They're like, hey, I'm telling all people to do all this stuff and they don't do it. I'm like, I know, but you can't, lead a horse to water, right? Like that's all you can do.
I'm going to check social media real quick, because we usually take questions. Let's see. I've got Louis Vargas. Hey, thanks for joining us again, Louis. Can't pull up your full question for some reason on the app, but Mohammed, thank you for joining us. See any questions? I see a lot of hellos and thanks for the insight. Well, Jay, thank you so much. The book is Talk.
My pleasure. Fun.
I'll put the link in the post after we get off for people. But where can they find the book, and where can they find you in terms of speaking and engaging you for that?
The book's available all the places and ways that books can be procured. Hard copy, Kindle, audiobook read by me. Talktriggers.com is the book website. All kinds of free content there as well. And then for me, jbaer.com is my site. And then our main website is convinceandconvert.com, which has more than 5,000 free articles for business owners and managers and marketers about all the stuff we're talking about here today.
Well, there you go. I think for me, it's an essential book to read. If you don't have a word of mouth strategy, this is you've got to pick this book up, because I think it's critical really to our survival as small businesses. Jay, thank you. This has been the Power Lunch every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Please join us around noon, and we've got a stellar lineup this week. We've got Ben Angel on Friday. We've got Kevin Eichelberry on Thursday. We just got a really stellar lineup this week. And if you like or love the program, give it a like or share, give us a comment. Please share it with your network so they can benefit from these conversations. And thank you for spending some time with us. You are why we do the show. And have a great afternoon.